The handcuffs bit into Clarisa Washington's wrists like frozen steel as the courtroom erupted around her. Life without parole. The judge's voice cut through the chaos, each word a nail in her coffin. The gavel came down with the finality of thunder, and for a moment, the world went silent except for the sound of her own heart breaking. 57 years old, silver threading through her natural hair, Clarisa had always believed this day would come. Deep in her bones, she'd carried the certainty that someone like her, a black woman who'd grown up unwanted, unloved, always reaching for a worth that seemed just beyond her grasp, was destined to fall. The system had finally caught up with her, just like she'd always known it would. Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to my channel. I can already feel your hearts racing just from that opening. And trust me, this story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that will leave you breathless. Before we dive deeper into Clarisa's incredible journey, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this one, stories that remind us of the power of love and redemption, are exactly what this channel is all about. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because sometimes the most beautiful endings start with the darkest beginnings. 30 years earlier, on a night when winter seemed determined to freeze every living thing in Detroit, 27-year-old Clarisa Washington was walking home from her third job, cleaning offices downtown until 2 a.m. Her breath formed clouds in the bitter air, and her second-hand boots had holes that let in every puddle, every fragment of ice. She was bone-tired, the kind of tired that settles into your soul when you've been fighting just to survive for as long as you can remember. That's when she heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it beneath the whistle of wind through broken streetlights. A whimper. A child's whimper. Clarisa stopped dead in her tracks, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She'd grown up hearing sounds like that. The sounds children make when they're scared, cold, abandoned. Sounds she'd made herself, curled up in foster homes where love was rationed like government cheese. Following the sound, she found them huddled behind a dumpster in the alley beside Murphy's corner store. Two children, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. The older one, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6, had wrapped his thin jacket around a baby girl who was maybe 2 years old. His dark eyes were wide with a fear too old for his young face, and when he saw Clarisa approaching, he pulled the little girl closer. "Please don't call the police," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They'll split us up. Maya's all I got." Clarisa's knees nearly buckled. She saw herself in those eyes, the same desperate hope, the same bone-deep terror of being abandoned again. Without thinking, she knelt in the dirty snow, ignoring the cold seeping through her thin work pants. "What are your names, baby?" she asked softly. "I'm Darius," the boy said, still clutching the little girl. "This is Maya. Our mama, she left us here yesterday. Said she was going to get food, but..." His voice trailed off, and Clarisa could see the truth he was too young to speak aloud. Maya stirred in her brother's arms, her tiny face flushed with fever, her lips blue with cold. Clarisa's heart cracked wide open. This little girl was going to die out here, and this brave little boy was going to die trying to protect her. "Listen to me, Darius," Clarisa said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "I live just 3 blocks from here. It's warm, and I've got food. Will you let me help you?" Darius studied her face for what felt like an eternity. Clarisa knew what he was looking for, the same thing she'd searched for in every adult face during her own childhood. Kindness, safety, truth. Finally, slowly, he nodded. That night changed everything. Clarisa carried Maya while Darius walked beside them, his small hand clutched in hers. She fed them soup heated on her tiny stove, wrapped them in every blanket she owned, and watched them sleep on her pull-out couch while she sat awake in her kitchen chair, overwhelmed by a feeling she'd never experienced before. Purpose. For the first time in her life, Clarisa Washington felt like she mattered. But even as she watched those children sleep, even as something that felt like love bloomed in her chest, a familiar voice whispered in the back of her mind, "You're not good enough for this. You can't save them. You couldn't even save yourself." The voice belonged to every person who'd ever made her feel small, every system that had failed her, every mirror that had shown her a face she'd been taught not to love. It sounded like her own mother, who'd surrendered her to foster care at age 7 with the words, "I can't handle you anymore." It sounded like the social workers who'd shuffled her from home to home like a damaged package no one wanted to keep. Most of all, it sounded like Regina Matthews, her former best friend who'd grown bitter with envy over the years, watching Clarisa build something beautiful from nothing while Regina's own life crumbled. Regina, who would one day orchestrate Clarisa's downfall with the precision of someone who'd been planning revenge for decades. But that night, watching Darius curl protectively around his baby sister, Clarisa made a decision that would echo through the next 30 years of all their lives. She would love these children with every broken piece of her heart. She would give them what no one had ever given her, a home, stability, the bone-deep knowledge that they were wanted. Even if she wasn't good enough, even if she was destined to fail, she would pour every ounce of love she had into these two precious souls. What Clarisa didn't know, as she sat vigil over those sleeping children, was that love has a power all its own. That the seeds she was planting in that tiny apartment would grow into something strong enough to save her life 3 decades later, when everything she'd built came crashing down around her. But first, she had to survive the doubt. She had to survive the system that wanted to take the children away. She had to survive the slow, careful work of building trust with 2 kids who'd already learned that adults couldn't be counted on. And she had to survive Regina Matthews, who was already watching from the shadows with jealousy burning in her heart like acid. The question that would haunt the next 30 years was simple. When love collides with a system designed to tear families apart, when goodness faces off against calculated evil, when a woman who's never believed in her own worth is forced to fight for everything she holds dear, who wins? The answer would come to define not just Clarisa's life, but the lives of every person she touched along the way. The first 3 months were a dance of broken trust and tentative hope. Darius would wake up screaming most nights, his small body drenched in sweat as nightmares dragged him back to that alley. He'd check on Maya obsessively, touching her forehead for fever, making sure she was still breathing, counting her tiny fingers like a prayer. At 6 years old, he carried the weight of being a parent, and it showed in the way his shoulders never fully relaxed, even in Clarisa's warm apartment. Maya, barely 2, spoke in whispers when she spoke at all. She'd follow Clarisa around the small space like a shadow, but would bolt if Clarisa moved too quickly or raised her voice even slightly. The little girl had learned that adults could vanish without warning, and she wasn't taking any chances. Clarisa understood their fear because it lived in her bones too. Every morning when she woke up to find them still there, still breathing, still hers, she felt a mixture of gratitude and terror. The gratitude was simple, another day to love them, another chance to get it right. The terror was more complicated. What if she screwed this up? What if her own damaged heart couldn't give them what they needed? What if the system found out she was harboring children who weren't legally hers? The deepest fear, the one that kept her awake at night, was more personal. What if she turned out to be just like her own mother? What if the day came when these children felt like too much, when their needs overwhelmed her ability to provide, when she looked at them and felt trapped instead of blessed? Clarisa's own childhood had been a masterclass in abandonment. Her mother, Denise, had been 19 when Clarisa was born. Too young, too poor, too addicted to cocaine to handle a baby who cried too much and needed too much. For 7 years, Clarisa had tried to be good enough, quiet enough, small enough to earn her mother's love. She'd made her own breakfast from whatever she could reach in the cabinets, taught herself to tie her shoes, learned to disappear when Denise brought men home who looked at Clarisa with eyes that made her skin crawl. The day Denise finally gave up, she'd told 7-year-old Clarisa it was temporary. Just until Mama gets her life together, baby girl. You be good for these people, you hear me? That was 20 years ago. Clarisa never saw her mother again. Foster care had been a revolving door of homes where she was either ignored, exploited, or actively unwanted. The Hendersons kept her for 2 years but treated her like unpaid help, making her clean and cook while their biological children played. The Johnsons were kind but overwhelmed. They already had 6 kids, and Clarisa was just another mouth to feed, another body taking up space. The Williamses sent her back after 3 months because she wasn't adjusting well. Code for she cried too much and asked too many questions about whether they were planning to keep her. By the time she aged out of the system at 18, Clarisa had lived in 12 different homes. She'd learned to pack her few belongings in garbage bags because suitcases implied permanence, and permanence was a luxury she'd never been offered. Now, watching Darius check the locks on her apartment door every night and seeing Maya flinch when strangers spoke too loudly, Clarisa recognized the same survival instincts she'd developed. These children were waiting for her to give up on them, just like every adult in their short lives had done. But there was something else she recognized in them, something that gave her hope: their fierce love for each other. The way Darius would share his food with Maya even when he was still hungry. How Maya would curl up against her big brother when thunderstorms scared her, and how Darius would sing softly until she fell asleep. They'd protected each other when no one else would, and that kind of love, pure, sacrificial, instinctive, was something Clarisa had never experienced but desperately wanted to nurture. It was Regina Matthews who first noticed the change in Clarisa. Regina had been Clarisa's best friend since they were both 16, working the evening shift at McDonald's and dreaming of better lives. They'd been inseparable back then, two young black women against the world, sharing everything from clothes to secrets to hopes for the future. Regina was the bold one, the one who flirted with boys and talked back to managers and wore her confidence like armor. Clarisa was quieter, more careful, but Regina had always said that was what she loved about her. "You keep me grounded, Clarisa. You're the steady one." They'd maintained their friendship even as their lives took different paths. Regina had married her high school boyfriend, Jerome, when they were both 21. She'd been so happy then, showing off her ring, talking about the house they'd buy, the children they'd have, the perfect life that was finally within reach. But Jerome had turned out to be a man who hit when he drank, and who drank every day after he lost his job at the auto plant. Regina's dreams of children died after 3 miscarriages that left her hollow and bitter. The house they'd planned to buy got foreclosed on when Jerome's drinking led to him crashing their car and getting arrested for his second DUI. By the time Clarisa took in Darius and Maya, Regina was divorced, living alone in a studio apartment that smelled like disappointment, and watching her former best friend build the family Regina had always wanted but could never have. The first time Regina met the children, she'd smiled and cooed and brought them little gifts from the dollar store. But Clarisa caught something in her eyes, a flicker of something sharp and hungry that made her uncomfortable. "They're beautiful," Regina had said, watching Maya play with the little doll she'd brought. "You're so lucky, getting to have children without all the mess of pregnancy and marriage and all that." There was something in the way she said lucky that felt like a slap, as if finding 2 abandoned children in an alley was some kind of gift rather than a heartbreaking tragedy. As if Clarisa had somehow gotten the easy path to motherhood, while Regina had suffered through loss after loss. "It's not about luck," Clarisa had said quietly. "These babies have been through things no child should ever experience." Regina's smile had tightened. "Of course. I didn't mean. I just meant you're good at this. The mothering thing. It comes so naturally to you." But it didn't come naturally. Every day was a battle against her own insecurities, her own damaged patterns, her own fear of becoming the kind of adult who lets children down. When Darius had nightmares, Clarisa would sit on the floor beside the couch, not sure if touching him would comfort or terrify him. When Maya refused to eat, Clarisa would panic, wondering if she was failing already, if this was how it started. The slow erosion of care that would end with her giving up like everyone else had. The breakthrough came 4 months after that first night. Maya had been running a fever for 2 days, and Clarisa had been beside herself with worry, calling in sick to work to stay home with her. Darius had been unusually quiet, watching his sister with the same terrified vigilance he'd had in the alley. On the 3rd night, as Clarisa sat in the kitchen chair she'd pulled beside the couch, watching Maya sleep fitfully, she felt a small hand slip into hers. Darius stood beside her in his 2 big pajamas, his dark eyes serious beyond his years. "Are you going to send us away if Maya don't get better?" he whispered. Clarisa's heart shattered. This little boy, who'd already been abandoned once, was preparing himself for it to happen again. She turned in her chair and pulled him close, feeling his small body trembling against her. "Baby, no," she whispered fiercely. "No, no, no. You and Maya are my children now. That means forever. That means when you're sick, I take care of you. When you're scared, I hold you. When you grow up and have children of your own, you'll still be my babies. That's what forever means." Darius was quiet for a long moment, and when he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were full of tears. Promise. Promise. For the first time since she'd found them, Darius smiled. Really smiled, the kind that started in his eyes and spread across his whole face like sunrise. Then I guess you're our mama now, he said simply. That night, Maya's fever broke, and Clarisa Washington officially became a mother to 2 children who needed her as much as she needed them. What she didn't know was that Regina Matthews had been watching from her apartment window across the street, witnessing the moment Clarisa finally got everything Regina had ever wanted. The seeds of envy that had been planted months earlier began to grow into something darker, something that would fester for decades until it exploded into a plan so calculated, so cruel, that it would nearly destroy the family Clarisa had fought so hard to build. But that night, none of that mattered. That night, Clarisa held her children and finally understood what it felt like to be needed, to be chosen, to be someone's safe harbor in a storm. For the first time in her life, Clarisa Washington felt worthy of love. She had no idea how much she'd need that strength in the years to come. Present day, 30 years later. The knock came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Clarisa was in her kitchen, humming an old gospel song while she prepared breakfast, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in the neat bun she'd worn to her job at Lincoln Elementary for the past 15 years. At 57, she moved with the quiet confidence of a woman who'd found her place in the world. A respected third-grade teacher, a pillar of her community, and most importantly, the proud mother of 2 extraordinary adults. The apartment had grown with their family over the years. What started as a tiny 1-bedroom had become a cozy 3-bedroom house on Maple Street, filled with graduation photos, report cards stuck to the refrigerator long past their due date, and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. Family pictures lined the mantel. Darius in his cap and gown receiving his law degree from Howard University, Maya at her medical school graduation from Emory, both of them beaming beside the woman who'd saved their lives. Clarisa had never married. There had been men over the years, good men who'd wanted to court her, to build something with her, but she'd always held back. Not because she didn't want love, but because she'd learned that the deepest love she'd ever known was the one she shared with Darius and Maya. They were her heart walking around outside her body, and she'd never felt the need to add to that perfect equation. The sharp rap of knuckles against would cut through her morning routine like a blade. Clarisa Washington? The voice was official, cold. Through the peephole, she saw badges, uniforms, faces that meant trouble. Her hands went immediately to her throat, a gesture she'd developed during her foster care years when authority figures meant upheaval, meant losing everything you'd grown to love. But she wasn't that scared little girl anymore. She was a woman with nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Yes, she called through the door. Detroit Police. We need to speak with you, ma'am. Clarisa's heart began to race, but not for herself. Her first thought, her only thought, was for her children. Had something happened to Darius at his law firm? Was Maya safe at the hospital where she was completing her residency in pediatric surgery? She opened the door with trembling fingers. 3 officers stood on her porch. 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing the kind of expressions that said this wasn't a social call. The older man, heavy-set with gray at his temples, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Detective Morrison. This is Detective Chun and Officer Williams. We have a warrant for your arrest. The words hit her like a physical blow. I'm sorry, what? Clarisa Washington, you're under arrest for embezzlement of funds from Lincoln Elementary School, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. The world tilted. Clarisa's vision blurred as the detective continued reading her rights, his voice echoing as if from the bottom of a well. Embezzlement? Money laundering? The accusations were so absurd, so impossible, that for a moment she wondered if she was still asleep, trapped in one of the nightmares that occasionally plagued her. There's been a mistake, she managed to whisper as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I would never. I'm a teacher. I've worked at Lincoln for 15 years. I would never steal from children. Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly. Ma'am, we have bank records, financial transactions, and witness testimony that says otherwise. This investigation has been going on for 8 months. The evidence is substantial. 8 months. Clarisa's mind reeled. What evidence? What witness testimony? She taught third grade, for God's sake. She helped children learn to read, tied their shoes, dried their tears when they missed their parents. The most money she'd ever handled was the $20 she kept in the petty cash box for classroom supplies. As they led her from her home, the home she'd bought with 15 years of teacher's salary, where she'd raised 2 abandoned children into extraordinary adults, where every wall held memories of birthday parties and homework sessions and lazy Sunday mornings, Clarisa caught sight of a figure across the street. Regina Matthews stood at her apartment window, watching the scene unfold with an expression that was impossible to read. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something cold ran down Clarisa's spine. Regina's face held no surprise, no shock at seeing her former best friend led away in handcuffs. Only satisfaction. The ride to the police station passed in a blur of sirens and city streets. Clarisa sat in the back of the squad car, her hands cuffed behind her back, trying to process what was happening. Someone had accused her of stealing money from her school. Someone had provided evidence that she was a criminal. Someone had been watching her for 8 months, building a case that would destroy everything she'd worked for. But who? And why? At the station, they processed her like any other criminal. Fingerprints, photos, the humiliating ritual of having her personal belongings cataloged and stored. Her wallet with the pictures of Darius and Maya at various ages. Her house keys on the keychain Darius had made her in 2nd grade. Her reading glasses that she'd need to grade papers tomorrow. Except she wouldn't be grading papers tomorrow. She might never grade papers again. The holding cell was small, gray, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. Clarisa sat on the narrow bench, staring at her hands. Hands that had braided Maya's hair for picture day, that had taught thousands of children to write their names, that had never taken a single penny that didn't belong to her. "Your lawyer's here." The voice belonged to Officer Williams, the younger woman who'd been part of her arrest. She led Clarisa to a small conference room where a man in an expensive suit waited with a briefcase and an expression of barely concealed disgust. "Ms. Washington, I'm Thomas Bennett. The state has appointed me to represent you." He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile. "I'll be honest with you, this case is not looking good. The prosecution has bank records showing regular deposits into an account bearing your name and social security number. They have testimony from school administrators about missing funds. And they have." He paused, consulting his notes with the air of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "They have witness testimony from someone who claims to have seen you taking cash from fundraising events, manipulating financial records, and discussing the scheme with a co-conspirator." "That's impossible," Clarisa said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Every fundraising event at Lincoln is overseen by multiple people. The financial records are handled by the district office, not individual teachers. And I don't have any co-conspirators because I haven't done anything wrong." Bennett looked at her with the tired expression of a public defender who'd heard every possible denial. "The witness is someone who's known you for decades. Someone the jury will find credible." "Who?" The word came out as a whisper. "Regina Matthews. She claims you've been running this scheme for years and that she tried to talk you out of it multiple times." The room spun. Clarisa gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling off her chair. Regina, her oldest friend. The woman who'd been in her life since they were teenagers working at McDonald's, who'd watched her raise Darius and Maya, who'd celebrated every milestone and success. Regina, who'd been watching from her window that morning with satisfaction instead of shock. "She's lying," Clarisa breathed. "I don't know why, but she's lying." Bennett shrugged. "Prove it. Because right now, her testimony, combined with the financial evidence, is enough to put you away for 25 to life under Michigan's habitual offender statute. You had a juvenile record, didn't you? Some trouble when you were in foster care." Clarisa's heart sank. At 15, desperate and hungry, she'd been caught shoplifting food from a grocery store. The juvenile conviction had been sealed, but apparently not sealed enough. "That was 42 years ago," she whispered. "I was a child. I was starving. Doesn't matter. It establishes a pattern of criminal behavior. Combined with these charges." He closed his briefcase with a snap. "I'd recommend taking whatever plea deal they offer. This case goes to trial, you're looking at life without parole." Life without parole. The words echoed in Clarisa's head as they led her back to the holding cell. Life in prison for crimes she didn't commit, based on lies told by a woman she'd once trusted with her deepest secrets. But even as despair threatened to swallow her whole, even as the familiar voice of unworthiness whispered that this was what she deserved, that this was proof she'd never been good enough, Clarisa held on to one thought. Darius and Maya. They would hear about her arrest within hours. They would see their mother's mugshot on the news, would read the accusations in black and white, would have their colleagues and friends asking if they'd known she was a criminal all along. But they would also know, with the bone-deep certainty that comes from 30 years of unconditional love, that their mother was innocent. They would know because they knew her heart. They knew the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them fed, who'd sat up all night when they were sick, who'd cheered louder than anyone at every graduation, every achievement, every moment of triumph in their lives. And if Clarisa knew her children, and she did better than she knew her own heartbeat, they wouldn't rest until they found a way to bring her home. Somewhere in the city, Regina Matthews was probably celebrating. She'd finally gotten her revenge, finally torn down the woman who'd had everything Regina wanted. She'd crafted the perfect crime, the perfect frame, the perfect destruction of a life built on love and sacrifice. But Regina had made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that love, real love, the kind that survives abandonment and trauma and 30 years of building trust brick by brick, is stronger than hate. She'd forgotten that families forged in fire don't break easily. And she'd forgotten that Darius Washington was one of the best defense attorneys in Detroit, while Maya Washington had spent years learning to fight for children who couldn't fight for themselves. The woman who'd saved 2 abandoned children was about to discover just how far those children would go to save her back. The phone call came while Dr. Maya Washington was in the middle of a complex surgery, her steady hands guiding a scalpel through delicate tissue to repair a 7-year-old's heart defect. She was 32 now, poised and brilliant, with her mother's gentle eyes and a reputation as one of Detroit Medical Center's most promising pediatric surgeons. The nurse who interrupted her mid-procedure was breaking every protocol, but the look on her face said this couldn't wait. "Doctor, I'm so sorry, but there's an emergency call. It's about your mother." Maya's hands never stopped moving, but her heart lurched. "Take a message. I'll call back in 20 minutes. "Ma'am," the nurse whispered urgently, "your mother has been arrested. It's all over the news." The scalpel trembled for just a fraction of a second, imperceptible to anyone watching, but Maya felt it like an earthquake. 30 years of trust, of absolute faith in the woman who'd saved her life, steadied her hands. Whatever this was, there was an explanation. There had to be. "Dr. Richards, can you close for me?" she asked her attending, her voice professionally calm even as her world tilted off its axis. 3 miles away, in the gleaming offices of Washington and Associates, 36-year-old Darius Washington was experiencing his own earth-shattering moment. He'd built his law practice from nothing, specializing in criminal defense for clients the system had written off. Kids from foster care, families torn apart by circumstance, people who reminded him of the boy he'd once been. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had been with him for 8 years and had never once interrupted him during a client meeting. Until today. "Mr. Washington, I apologize, but you need to see this." Her voice shook as she handed him her phone, the local news website open to a headline that made his blood turn to ice. "Beloved elementary teacher arrested in massive embezzlement scheme." Clarisa's booking photo stared back at him. The woman who'd found him shivering in an alley, who'd taught him that love wasn't conditional, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through law school. The woman who'd never taken a penny that wasn't earned, who'd given everything to make sure he and Maya had chances she'd never been given. "This is impossible," he said, his voice barely audible. His client, a young man facing drug charges, looked confused as Darius's composure cracked for the first time in his professional career. "Sir?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle. "Your sister called. She's on her way here." The next hour passed in a blur of frantic phone calls, news reports, and the growing horror of watching their mother's life be dissected by strangers. Darius and Maya met at his office, 2 successful adults reduced to the scared children they'd once been, clinging to each other as their world collapsed. "They're saying she stole $200,000 over 5 years, Maya said, pacing his office like a caged animal. They're saying there are bank accounts, witnesses, documentation. How is that possible? Darius was already on his laptop, pulling up everything he could find. The witness is Regina Matthews. Remember her? Mama's old friend. The bitter one who always made those weird comments. About how lucky Mama was to have us. Maya's medical training had taught her to read people, to notice the things others missed. She never liked that we existed. She's claiming Mama confessed the whole thing to her. Says she has recordings of their conversations. Darius's jaw tightened as he read the police report. Maya, this is sophisticated. Someone has been planning this for a long time. They drove to the Wayne County Jail in Maya's car, both of them silent with the kind of fear that goes bone deep. This was the woman who'd sung them to sleep during thunderstorms, who'd celebrated every A on every report card like they'd won the Nobel Prize, who'd worked double shifts to afford Maya's pre-med textbooks and Darius's law school application fees. Seeing Clarisa in an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled, was like watching their entire childhood be declared a lie. Babies, she whispered when they brought her to the visitation room, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had that first night, vulnerable, scared, but trying to be strong for the children who needed her. Mama, what is this? Maya's voice cracked. They're saying you stole money from the school. I didn't. Clarisa's voice was steady, but her eyes held a fear they'd never seen before. I swear to you both, on everything we've built together, I didn't do this. Then why is Regina saying you did? Darius leaned forward, his lawyer mind already working. What does she gain from this? Clarisa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the metal table between them. I think she's been jealous for a long time. Of you two. Of what we built. Her marriage fell apart, she never had children, and watching us be happy. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But I never thought she'd do something like this. The public defender they assigned me says I should take a plea deal. 25 years instead of life. Her voice broke on the word life. He says the evidence is too strong, that no jury will believe me over Regina. No. Maya's voice was fierce, the same tone she used when fighting for her young patients. Absolutely not. You are not pleading guilty to something you didn't do. Baby, you don't understand. They have bank records with my name. Then they're fake, Darius interrupted. Mama, you raised us to fight for what's right. You think we're going to let you rot in prison for something you didn't do. The visit ended too soon, but not before they made promises. Darius would take over her case, conflicts of interest be damned. Maya would use her connections at the hospital to investigate the financial irregularities. They would tear apart every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every alleged phone recording until they found the truth. Walking out of that jail was the hardest thing either of them had ever done. Over the next few weeks, the case became a media sensation. Trusted teacher's double life exposed. Beloved educator accused of stealing from students. The headlines were relentless, and with each one, Clarisa's reputation crumbled a little more. Parents who'd trusted her with their children were interviewed, expressing shock and betrayal. Former colleagues distanced themselves, afraid the scandal would taint their own careers. Darius threw himself into the case with an obsession that worried Maya. He hired forensic accountants, investigated every bank transaction, and tracked down every witness. What he found made his blood boil. The case against Clarisa was almost too perfect. Every piece of evidence pointed directly to her, with no room for doubt or alternative explanations. It's like someone spent years planning this, he told Maya during one of their late-night strategy sessions in his office. The bank accounts were opened gradually, the transactions timed to coincide with school fundraising events, the amounts carefully calculated to stay under federal reporting requirements. Maya looked up from the medical files she'd been reviewing. She'd taken a leave of absence to help with the case, much to her supervisor's dismay. What about the recordings Regina claims to have? That's the thing. She says she has them, but they haven't been released yet. The prosecution is holding them back, claiming they need time to authenticate them. Darius rubbed his eyes, exhausted. Maya, what if? What if what? What if the recordings are real, but they're not what they seem? What if Regina set Mama up, got her talking about financial stress or something innocent, then edited the conversations to sound incriminating? It was Maya who first noticed the pattern. She'd always been good with details. It's what made her a good surgeon. And something about the timing bothered her. Darius, look at this. The first suspicious transaction happened 6 months after Regina's divorce was finalized. The amounts increased right around the time her ex-husband got remarried. So Regina's been spiraling for years. Watching Mama raise us, watching us succeed, watching us buy her a house and take her on vacations and treat her like the queen she is. Maya's voice grew hard. Regina never got her happy ending. But instead of working on herself, she decided to destroy the woman who had what she wanted. But proving it was another matter entirely. Regina had covered her tracks well. She'd maintained her friendship with Clarisa for years, documenting every conversation, every moment of happiness, building what looked like a solid foundation for her eventual betrayal. To the outside world, she was a concerned friend trying to save children from a criminal educator. The breaking point came when Darius discovered that Regina had been dating Detective Morrison, the lead investigator on Clarisa's case, for the past year. A relationship that had conveniently started right around the time the anonymous tip about Clarisa's supposed crimes had been called in. "This is it," he told Maya excitedly. "This proves the investigation was compromised from the beginning. Morrison had a personal relationship with the key witness. But their celebration was short-lived. When Darius filed a motion to dismiss based on police misconduct, he discovered that Morrison had recused himself from the case months earlier, citing potential conflicts of interest. On paper, everything looked proper and legal. Regina had thought of everything. Meanwhile, Clarisa was deteriorating in jail. The woman who'd spent 30 years building up 2 broken children was watching her life's work crumble in real time. Former students' parents crossed the street to avoid her family members. The house on Maple Street, filled with 3 decades of love and laughter, sat empty because the asset seizure had frozen all her accounts. Worst of all, Clarisa was starting to believe the voice that had haunted her since childhood. Maybe you really aren't good enough. Maybe this is what someone like you deserves. During one particularly difficult visit, she looked at her children, her babies who'd grown into extraordinary adults, and said the words that broke their hearts. Maybe you should let me take the plea deal. Maybe it's time to cut your losses and move on with your lives. Mama, no. Maya reached across the table, tears streaming down her face. You don't get to give up on us. Not after 30 years of teaching us to fight. You saved our lives, Darius added, his voice thick with emotion. Now it's our turn to save yours. But as the trial date approached and Regina's carefully constructed web of lies held firm, both siblings wondered if love would be enough to overcome a justice system that seemed determined to destroy the woman who'd given them everything. The battle for Clarisa's freedom was just beginning, and Regina Matthews was about to learn that the children she'd helped traumatize 30 years ago had grown into formidable adults who would stop at nothing to protect their mother. The discovery came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday night, 3 weeks before Clarisa's trial was set to begin. Maya had been living on coffee and determination, hunched over her laptop in Darius's office, cross-referencing financial records with hospital databases when her tired eyes caught something that made her heart stop. A name, hidden in the employment records of Detroit Medical Center's financial department, buried in a list of temporary consultants hired over the past 5 years. Regina Matthews, computer systems analyst, contracted for database modernization and security updates. Darius. Her voice was barely a whisper, but something in her tone made him look up from the legal briefs he'd been reviewing for the 100th time. What is it? Regina worked at my hospital, in the financial department. She had access to employee banking information, social security numbers, everything she'd need to. Maya's hands were shaking as she pulled up more records. Oh my God, Darius. She didn't just frame Mama. She's been stealing from the hospital too. The revelation hit like lightning. Regina hadn't just targeted Clarisa. She'd been running a sophisticated identity theft operation, using her access to employee records to open fraudulent accounts and siphon money from various sources. Clarisa's case was just the crown jewel, the perfect revenge wrapped in a profitable scheme. She must have been planning this for years, Darius said, his lawyer mind racing through the implications. Getting close to Mama again, documenting their conversations, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Maya was already digging deeper, her medical training helping her spot patterns others might miss. Look at the dates. She was hired at the hospital right after her divorce. She needed money, but more than that, she needed access. She's been building this false identity theft ring using dozens of people's information, including Mama's. Especially Mama's. Because Mama was the one she really wanted to destroy. They worked through the night, piecing together a puzzle that was far more complex than they'd imagined. Regina hadn't just opened one fake account in Clarissa's name. She'd created an entire false financial history. Credit cards, investment accounts, even a rental property registered under Clarissa's social security number. It was a masterpiece of fraud, years in the making. At 6 a.m., exhausted but electrified by their discovery, they tried to call Clarissa's public defender, Thomas Bennett. His secretary informed them that he was unavailable and wouldn't be returning their calls. That's strange, Maya said as they drove toward the jail for visiting hours. Why wouldn't he want to hear evidence that could clear his client? They got their answer an hour later, sitting across from Clarisa in the gray visitation room. Her face, already gaunt from weeks of jail food and sleepless nights, crumpled when they told her about Bennett. He came to see me yesterday, she said quietly. Said he'd been offered a position with the prosecutor's office. Said my case was being transferred to another public defender, someone named Jennifer Hayes. He recommended I take the plea deal before the new lawyer took over. He's been sabotaging your case, Darius realized, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Bennett was never trying to defend you. He's been working with the prosecution from the beginning. Maya leaned forward, her eyes blazing with the same fury she'd felt as a 2-year-old when adults tried to separate her from her brother. Mama, we found something. Regina's been stealing from my hospital. She had access to employee financial information. She didn't just frame you. She's been running an identity theft ring. Hope flickered in Clarissa's eyes for the first time in weeks, but it was tempered by 30 years of learning that good things didn't last for people like her. Can you prove it? We're going to, Darius promised. But Mama, this is bigger than we thought. Regina's not working alone. Bennett's involvement, Morrison's convenient recusal, the way all the evidence lines up so perfectly. This is a conspiracy. What they didn't know was that Regina Matthews was at that very moment sitting in a downtown coffee shop, her laptop open to a banking website, transferring the final payment to Thomas Bennett's offshore account. She'd been watching the news coverage of Clarissa's case with satisfaction, but also with growing nervousness. The trial was approaching, and trials meant scrutiny, meant lawyers digging into details that were better left buried. It's time to end this, she murmured into her phone, speaking to someone whose voice carried the authority of years in law enforcement. The Washington kids are getting too close. We need to accelerate the timeline. The plea hearing is set for Monday. If she doesn't take it, we move to Plan B. And if Plan B doesn't work, then we make sure she doesn't make it to trial. Back at the jail, Clarisa was experiencing something she hadn't felt since that first night she'd found Darius and Maya in the alley. The terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of being saved. There's something else, she said suddenly, looking at her children with new intensity. Regina came to visit me last week. Said she was worried about me, wanted to make sure I was okay. But something felt off. She kept asking questions about you too. Where Maya was working, what cases Darius was handling, whether you were both still living in Detroit. She was gathering intelligence, Maya realized. Making sure we couldn't interfere with her plan. Or making sure she knew where to find us if we became a problem, Darius added grimly. The new public defender, Jennifer Hayes, turned out to be a pleasant surprise. Young, hungry, and genuinely outraged by the evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, she listened to Darius and Maya's findings with growing excitement. This is exactly what we need, she said, spreading their research across her desk. Regina Matthews created a false identity in your mother's name and used it to steal money, then pointed the finger at the real Clarisa when the heat got too close. We can prove this. But will it be enough? Maya asked. The trial starts in 2 weeks. Hayes was quiet for a moment, studying the evidence with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent her career fighting for clients no one else believed in. It's enough to create reasonable doubt, maybe enough to prove innocence. But we need to be careful. If Regina realizes we're onto her, she might disappear. Or worse, she might accelerate whatever endgame she has planned. That afternoon, as they left Hayes's office feeling genuinely hopeful for the first time in months, neither Darius nor Maya noticed the black sedan that had been following them since they'd left the jail. They didn't see the driver speaking urgently into a phone, or the way he accelerated when they turned toward Darius's office. They were so focused on saving their mother that they didn't realize they'd become targets themselves. The call came that evening while they were strategizing in Darius's office. Maya answered her phone without looking at the number, expecting it to be the forensic accountant they'd hired. "Dr. Washington?" The voice was electronically distorted, unrecognizable. "You and your brother need to stop digging into things that don't concern you." "Who is this?" "Someone who cares about your health. Both of your health. Your mother is going to take that plea deal, and you're going to convince her to take it. Otherwise, Detroit is going to lose two very promising young professionals in a very tragic accident." The line went dead. Maya looked at Darius, her face pale but her eyes burning with the same determination that had kept her alive on the streets at age 2. "They just threatened us." "Good," Darius said, his jaw set with grim satisfaction. "That means we're close. That means Regina is scared. What do we do now?" Darius walked to his office safe and pulled out a small recording device, something he'd learned to carry after years of dealing with clients whose lives depended on documenting the truth. "Now we set a trap, and we pray that 30 years of Mama's love taught us to be smarter than the people trying to destroy her." Outside, in the black sedan parked across the street, Regina Matthews watched the lights in Darius's office and smiled. She'd built the perfect crime, destroyed the woman who'd had everything she wanted, and was about to eliminate the two loose ends that threatened to unravel it all. What she didn't know was that the children she was targeting had learned their most important lessons from a woman who'd never given up on anything worth fighting for. And Clarisa Washington, despite everything Regina had taken from her, had raised two of the most formidable fighters Detroit had ever seen. The war for Clarisa's freedom was about to become a battle for all their lives, and Regina Matthews was about to discover that love, when pushed to its limits, becomes an unstoppable force. The explosion happened at 3:42 a.m., turning Maya's apartment into a ball of fire and twisted metal that lit up the Detroit skyline like a terrible sunrise. She wasn't home, hadn't been for 3 days, not since the threatening phone call had driven her to stay at a safe house Darius had arranged. But Regina Matthews didn't know that. Maya stood behind the police barricades with Darius, watching everything she owned disappear into smoke and ash. Her medical textbooks, the family photos she'd treasured for 30 years, the little doll Regina had given her that first day. All of it gone in a message that was crystal clear. "Stop digging, or you're next." "This is my fault," Clarisa whispered through the phone when they called her at the jail. "I should have taken the plea deal. I should have. Mama, don't." Maya's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "This just proves we're right. They're trying to scare us because they know we're close to the truth." But the truth felt impossibly far away as the investigation into Maya's apartment bombing was assigned to Detective Morrison, Regina's boyfriend, the man who'd supposedly recused himself from Clarisa's case. His first act was to declare it a gas leak accident, case closed, despite the obvious signs of arson. "Convenient," Darius muttered as they watched Morrison give his statement to the press. "A gas leak that happened to explode just after we discovered Regina's identity theft ring." Jennifer Hayes met them at a diner across town, her face grim. "I have bad news. The judge denied our motion to introduce the hospital evidence. Says it's not directly relevant to the charges against your mother." "That's impossible," Maya protested. "It proves Regina had the means and motive to frame her." Judge Harrison says it's speculative. Regina's employment at the hospital doesn't prove she used access to frame Clarisa, and without direct evidence linking her to the fake accounts, it's inadmissible. Darius slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle their coffee cups. "Judge Harrison, let me guess, he's up for re-election this year and needs the prosecutor's endorsement." Hayes nodded grimly. "And the prosecutor who's backing him is the same one pushing for your mother's life sentence." The web of corruption seemed to grow larger every day, encompassing judges, prosecutors, police detectives, and public defenders. Regina hadn't just planned the perfect crime. She'd built it within a system designed to protect itself, where questioning the evidence meant questioning everyone involved in building the case. That night, they received another blow. Jennifer Hayes called at midnight, her voice shaking. Someone broke into my office. Stole all the files related to your mother's case. Every piece of evidence we'd gathered, every witness statement, all of it gone. What about copies? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer from Hayes' tone. That's the thing. They knew exactly what to take. Left everything else untouched, but took my laptop, my backup drives, even the handwritten notes I'd made. Whoever did this knew the case inside and out. Maya and Darius looked at each other across the motel room they'd been hiding in since the explosion. Someone had been watching them, listening to their conversations, planning their every move. They were being hunted by people with resources they couldn't match, connections they couldn't break, and a ruthlessness that had already cost Maya everything she owned. The next morning brought the worst news yet. Clarisa called them from the jail, her voice hollow with defeat. They moved my trial date up. It starts tomorrow. Tomorrow? Darius felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. We haven't had time to prepare, to rebuild our evidence. The prosecutor filed an emergency motion. Said they had concerns about witness safety after the explosion at Maya's apartment. Judge Harrison agreed that the trial should proceed immediately before any more accidents occurred. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on any of them. Regina's attempt to intimidate them into backing down had been used to justify rushing the trial before they could rebuild their defense. Every move they'd made had been anticipated, countered, turned against them. "Mama," Maya said, her voice breaking, "we're going to figure this out. We just need more time." "Baby, there is no more time." Clarissa's voice was eerily calm, like someone who'd finally accepted their fate. Maybe this is how it was always going to end. Maybe I was fooling myself, thinking someone like me deserved a happy ending. "Don't say that," Darius pleaded. "You saved our lives. You gave us everything. I deserve what I get. That's what I learned a long time ago, and I should have remembered it." The line went quiet for a moment, and when Clarisa spoke again, her voice held the kind of resignation that comes from a lifetime of being let down. "I want you both to promise me something. When this is over, when I'm gone, I want you to build your own lives. Don't waste years visiting me in prison. Don't let my mistakes define your futures." "Mama, no. Promise me, Darius. Promise me, Maya. Let me go." The call ended with that terrible word hanging between them, "Go." As if 30 years of love could be dismissed. As if the woman who'd taught them to fight for everything worth having was now teaching them to surrender. That night, Jennifer Hayes delivered the final crushing blow. She found them at the motel with a manila envelope and an expression that looked like she was attending a funeral. "I'm off the case," she said simply. "Effective immediately. The state bar received a complaint about my conduct, alleging that I've been coaching witnesses and tampering with evidence. While they investigate, I'm suspended from practice." "On what grounds?" Maya demanded. Regina Matthews filed the complaint. Claims she has recordings of me threatening her, trying to get her to change her testimony. Hayes laughed bitterly. "Recordings that were apparently made during conversations I never had with a woman I've never met." The manila envelope contained their new legal representation. Thomas Bennett, the same public defender who'd tried to sabotage Clarissa's case from the beginning. He was being reinstated as her counsel, due to his familiarity with the case and the urgent timeline. "It's over," Darius said, staring at Bennett's smug headshot paperclipped to the legal documents. "They've thought of everything. Every angle, every possible defense, every way we might fight back." Maya sat on the motel bed, surrounded by the few possessions they'd managed to save from her apartment, and for the first time since she was 2 years old, she felt completely helpless. The system they'd believed in, the justice they'd fought for, the love that had sustained them for 30 years. None of it was enough against the machine that Regina had built to destroy their family. "She's going to die in prison," Maya whispered. "The woman who saved our lives is going to die in a cage because we weren't smart enough, fast enough, strong enough to save her back." Outside their motel room window, a black sedan sat in the parking lot, its occupants watching and waiting. Regina Matthews was in the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she sent final instructions to the team that had helped her orchestrate the perfect destruction of Clarisa Washington. "Tomorrow it's over," she said into the phone. 30 years of watching her have everything I wanted, and tomorrow it all ends. She didn't know that in a room 3 doors down, 2 broken children were about to remember the most important lesson their mother had ever taught them. That love doesn't give up, even when everything else does. That family means fighting for each other, even when the fight seems impossible. That sometimes, when you have nothing left to lose, you find a strength you never knew you had. In 12 hours, Clarisa Washington would walk into a courtroom to face a life sentence for crimes she didn't commit. Her children, the babies she'd pulled from an alley and raised with every ounce of love in her heart, would be in the gallery, watching her dreams die. But Regina Matthews had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd spent so many years focused on destroying Clarisa that she'd forgotten to account for what happens when you threaten a family forged in fire, built on love that had survived everything life could throw at it. The darkest hour was about to give birth to a fury that would shake the very foundations of Regina's perfect crime. At 4:17 a.m., 6 hours before Clarisa's trial was set to begin, Maya Washington made a decision that would change everything. She sat up in the motel bed where she'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, her mind racing with a desperate plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Darius," she whispered, shaking her brother awake. "I know how to save her." He opened his eyes, and she saw the same exhausted defeat that had been eating at both of them since the apartment explosion. "Maya, we tried. They've blocked every legal option, stolen our evidence, corrupted every official. They've been playing by the rules of a system they control," Maya interrupted, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But what if we stop playing by their rules?" She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. Colleagues from the hospital, medical school classmates, residents she'd trained with over the years. "We can't fight them in court, but we can fight them in the court of public opinion." "What are you talking about?" Maya's eyes were blazing with the same intensity she brought to life-or-death surgeries. Regina's been so focused on controlling the legal narrative that she forgot about social media. About the power of people who actually know Mama, who've seen her work, who know she'd never steal from children. She showed him her phone screen, her contacts list, hundreds of names from her years in medicine. "Every doctor, nurse, and medical student I know. Plus everyone from your law practice, everyone from Mama's school, everyone whose life she's touched in 30 years. Maya, even if people believe us, what can they do? The trial starts in 6 hours. They can witness it. They can demand transparency. They can make enough noise that Regina's conspiracy can't hide in the shadows anymore." Maya was already typing, her fingers flying across the phone screen. "But first we need proof. Real proof that even a corrupt judge can't ignore." Darius sat up fully, catching her excitement despite himself. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that comes from making Regina think she's won." Maya's plan was audacious in its simplicity. If Regina was monitoring their movements and communications, which clearly she was, then they would give her exactly what she expected to see. 2 defeated children saying goodbye to their mother before her inevitable conviction. But what Regina wouldn't see was the network they were building in the shadows, the army of people who loved Clarisa Washington and were willing to fight for her. The first call was to Dr. Patricia Chun, Maya's mentor at the hospital and one of the most respected physicians in Detroit. At 4:30 a.m., Chen's voice was groggy but immediately alert when she heard Maya's story. "Regina Matthews worked in our financial department," Chen said, her voice growing sharp. "Maya, I remember her. She was asking questions about employee banking information that seemed odd at the time, but HR said it was for the system upgrade." "Dr. Chen, would you be willing to testify about that?" "Honey, after what you've told me, I'll do more than testify. Give me 2 hours." The second call was to Marcus Johnson, a classmate from Darius's law school who now worked for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. At 4:45 a.m., Johnson listened to their story with professional interest that quickly turned to outrage. "You're describing a RICO case," he said. "Conspiracy, racketeering, public corruption. If you can prove even half of what you're telling me, we're talking federal charges against everyone involved. Can you do anything to help?" "Not officially. But unofficially?" I might know someone who'd be very interested in this Regina Matthews and her banking activities. The third call was to someone Maya hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Isaiah Torres, an investigative journalist who'd tried to date her during medical school. She'd turned him down then, but she knew he still had feelings for her. More importantly, she knew he had a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. Maya? His voice was surprised but pleased. It's been forever. What's? Isaiah, I need your help. My mother is being framed for crimes she didn't commit, and the trial starts in 5 hours. She told him everything: Regina's identity theft ring, the corrupted officials, the death threats, the bombing. When she finished, there was a long silence. Maya, if even half of what you're telling me is true, this is the biggest corruption scandal Detroit has seen in decades. Can you help us? I'm already in my car. By 6 a.m., something extraordinary was happening across Detroit. Dr. Chun had called every department head at the hospital, who were now reviewing financial records and employee access logs. Marcus Johnson had made unofficial inquiries that were generating official interest in Regina's banking activities. Isaiah Torres was using his media connections to alert other journalists about the story. But most importantly, word was spreading through the networks of people whose lives Clarisa had touched. Teachers who'd worked with her for 15 years. Parents whose children she'd inspired. Former students who were now adults but still remembered the woman who'd believed in them when no one else would. At 7 a.m., Maya and Darius walked into the Wayne County Courthouse to find something neither of them had expected: a crowd. More than 200 people filled the hallway outside courtroom 3A, wearing t-shirts that said "Justice for Clarisa," and holding signs with photos of her with their children. Teachers, parents, doctors, lawyers, grocery store clerks, bus drivers, a cross-section of Detroit united by their love for a woman they refused to believe was a criminal. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face as she recognized face after face. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter Clarisa had tutored through a learning disability. Dr. Williams, who'd worked with Maya at the free clinic Clarisa had helped organize. Even some of Darius's former clients, people he'd helped when the system had written them off. At 7:30 a.m., Isaiah Torres found them in the crowd. "Maya, we need to talk. My editor is running the story in today's online edition, but we just got a tip from someone inside the prosecutor's office." He pulled them aside, his expression grim. "Thomas Bennett isn't planning to mount any defense at all. He's going to put your mother on the stand, let the prosecution tear her apart, then recommend the jury find her guilty." "That's legal malpractice," Darius protested. "It's also guaranteed to get the conviction they want while making it look like she had representation." Isaiah's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. "But there's something else. My source says Regina Matthews is supposed to testify this afternoon. She's the prosecution's star witness." Maya felt something click into place in her mind. The final piece of a puzzle she'd been working on since the explosion. "Darius, what if Regina doesn't show up to testify?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Regina Matthews is too busy explaining her banking activities to federal investigators to make her court appearance?" At 8 a.m., as Judge Harrison called the court to order, Marcus Johnson was sitting in a coffee shop across town with 3 FBI agents, laying out a financial crimes case against Regina Matthews that involved identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that carried federal sentences of 25 years to life. At 8:15 a.m., as the prosecution made their opening statements painting Clarisa as a greedy criminal who'd stolen from innocent children, Dr. Chin was in a conference room at Detroit Medical Center with hospital administrators and federal investigators, showing them security footage of Regina accessing employee financial records without authorization. At 8:30 a.m., as Thomas Bennett stood up to make his pathetic excuse for an opening defense, Isaiah Torres' story went live on the Detroit Free Press website. Beloved teacher framed by identity theft ring. Federal investigation reveals massive corruption scandal. By 9 a.m., the story had been picked up by national news outlets. By 9:30, #JusticeForClarisa was trending on Twitter. By 10 a.m., there were crowds gathering outside courthouses in 3 different cities, demanding transparency in the case. At 10:45 a.m., as the prosecution called their first witness, Judge Harrison's phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, his face growing pale, then called a recess. Regina Matthews had been arrested by federal agents on charges of identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. Detective Morrison was being questioned about his relationship with a key witness. The prosecutor handling Clarisa's case was being investigated for withholding exculpatory evidence. The house of cards that Regina had spent years building was collapsing in a matter of hours. At 11:30 a.m., Clarisa sat in the defendant's chair, watching in stunned amazement as her children, the babies she'd found in an alley 30 years ago, orchestrated the most beautiful rescue she'd ever seen. Not through violence or revenge, but through the power of community, truth, and the love that had connected her to hundreds of people over 3 decades of service. "Mama," Maya mouthed from the gallery, "we told you we'd bring you home." For the first time in months, Clarisa Washington smiled. Really smiled, the kind that started in her heart and spread across her face like sunrise. The woman who'd spent her whole life believing she wasn't worthy of love was surrounded by proof that she was wrong. She hadn't just saved 2 children 30 years ago. She'd touched hundreds of lives, created a legacy of love that had grown into an army of people willing to fight for her. Regina Matthews had built the perfect crime, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. Love, when multiplied by community and driven by truth, becomes an unstoppable force that can bring down any conspiracy. The courtroom erupted into chaos at 12:47 p.m. when federal agents marched through the double doors, their footsteps echoing like thunder across the marble floor. Judge Harrison, his face ashen with the realization that his courtroom had become the center of a national scandal, banged his gavel frantically as reporters pushed past bailiffs and cameras flashed from every angle. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." But there was no controlling what was happening. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was the very public collapse of a conspiracy that had reached into every corner of Detroit's justice system. FBI Special Agent Catherine Ross approached the bench, her voice cutting through the noise with federal authority. "Your Honor, we need to speak with you immediately regarding new evidence in the case of People v. Washington." In the gallery, Maya grabbed Darius's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. This was it. The moment that would either vindicate 30 years of love or destroy everything they'd fought for. Judge Harrison called another recess, but as the prosecution team huddled frantically at their table, Thomas Bennett made a choice that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of joining the conference with the judge, he walked directly to Clarisa at the defendant's table. "Mrs. Washington," he said quietly, his voice carrying genuine shame for the first time since he'd taken her case. "I need to tell you something." Clarisa looked up at the man who'd been sabotaging her defense, her eyes holding none of the anger he deserved. After 30 years of raising children, she'd learned to see past people's mistakes to the fear underneath. "What is it, Mr. Bennett?" "They have my daughter." His voice broke on the words. "Regina Matthews and her people. They have my 8-year-old daughter, Sarah. They told me if I didn't throw your case, they'd." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Maya felt her heart clench with understanding. She'd spent her career fighting for children, and she knew there wasn't a parent alive who wouldn't betray anyone to save their child. "Where is she?" Darius asked, his lawyer mind already working. "I don't know. They move her every few days. But they call me, let me hear her voice, make sure I know she's scared and asking for her daddy." Bennett's hands were shaking. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I know you're innocent, but I couldn't let them hurt my baby." Before anyone could respond, Agent Ross returned from her conference with Judge Harrison. Her expression was grim but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen, this court is now under federal jurisdiction while we investigate charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and kidnapping related to this case." Kidnapping. The word hit Bennett like a physical blow, confirming what he'd known but tried not to believe. His cooperation hadn't just been about throwing a case. It had been about child endangerment, about federal crimes that carried life sentences. "Mr. Bennett," Agent Ross continued, "we're going to need your full cooperation to find your daughter and the people who took her." What happened next would be talked about for years afterward by everyone who witnessed it. Clarisa Washington, facing life in prison for crimes she didn't commit, stood up from the defendant's chair and walked over to Thomas Bennett. In front of 200 people, dozens of cameras, and federal agents, She put her hand on the shoulder of the man who'd tried to destroy her life. "We're going to find Sarah," she said simply. "And we're going to bring her home to you." The moment was captured by every camera in the room, but more importantly, it was captured in the hearts of everyone watching. Here was a woman who'd spent months in jail for crimes she didn't commit, offering comfort to the man who'd betrayed her because she understood the terror of a parent separated from their child. Agent Ross stepped forward. "Mrs. Washington, we have new information about Regina Matthews and her operation that we believe will completely exonerate you. But right now, we need to focus on finding Bennett's daughter and stopping Matthews before she disappears permanently." "She's not going to disappear," Maya said, standing up from the gallery. "She's too angry, too invested in seeing Mama destroyed. She'll want to watch it happen, even if it means getting caught." Darius nodded, understanding his sister's insight. Maya's right. This was never just about money for Regina. It was about revenge. She won't run until she's sure Mama's life is completely ruined. As if summoned by their words, the courtroom doors burst open again. Regina Matthews strode in, flanked by 2 federal agents in handcuffs, her face twisted with a rage that had been building for 30 years. "You think you've won?" she screamed at Clarisa, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls. "You think your perfect little family can just destroy everything I built?" The federal agents tried to restrain her, but Regina kept talking, her words spilling out in a torrent of jealousy and bitterness that revealed the depth of her obsession. "I watched you for 30 years. 30 years of you getting everything I wanted. A family, respect, love. All of it handed to you when you found those brats in the alley." Agent Ross was recording every word, but she let Regina continue. "Sometimes the best confessions came from people who couldn't stop themselves from talking. I planned this perfectly." Regina continued, struggling against her restraints. "The bank accounts, the fake evidence, turning everyone against you. I was going to watch you die in prison knowing that everyone you loved believed you were a criminal." "Where is Sarah Bennett?" Agent Ross demanded. Regina's laugh was wild, unhinged. "You'll never find her. She's with my associates, and they have orders to disappear if anything goes wrong. That little girl is going to grow up knowing her daddy chose a criminal over." "Regina." Clarissa's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Quiet, steady, filled with the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of loving broken people back to wholeness. Regina stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locking on the woman she'd spent decades trying to destroy. "You're hurt," Clarisa said simply. "You've been hurt for a long time, and you wanted me to hurt the same way. I understand that." "You don't understand anything," Regina spat. "I understand what it feels like to believe you're not worthy of love. I understand what it's like to watch other people have what you want and wonder why you can't have it too." Clarisa took a step closer, and something in her voice made the entire courtroom go silent. "But Regina, hurting me won't heal what's broken in you. And hurting an innocent child definitely won't." For just a moment, Regina's mask slipped. The rage flickered, and underneath it was something raw and desperate. The same look Maya had seen on her own face as a 2-year-old, the same fear that had lived in Darius's eyes that first night in the alley. "Sarah Bennett is 8 years old," Clarisa continued. "The same age I was when my mother gave up on me. The same age you were when your father walked out. You know what that feels like, Regina. You know what it does to a child." Regina's breathing was ragged, her whole body trembling. "It's too late. It's already done. It's not too late. Tell them where she is, and we can start fixing this." The courtroom held its breath. 30 years of friendship, betrayal, love, and hate came down to this moment. One broken woman being offered redemption by the person she'd tried to destroy. Regina looked at Clarisa for a long moment, and in her eyes was the echo of the teenage girl who'd once been Clarissa's best friend, who'd shared dreams and secrets and hoped for better days. "The warehouse on Gresham," she whispered. "The old Packard building. 3rd floor, room 317. Federal agents were already moving, radios crackling with urgent communications. Within minutes, a tactical team was racing across Detroit to find an 8-year-old girl whose only crime had been having a father who'd tried to do the right thing too late. 43 minutes later, Agent Ross received the call that made the entire courtroom exhale in relief. "Package secure. Sarah Bennett is safe and unharmed." The little girl was reunited with her father in that same courtroom, their embrace witnessed by hundreds of people and broadcast live across the nation. Thomas Bennett held his daughter and sobbed apologies into her hair, while federal agents arrested the 3 people who'd held her captive. But the most powerful moment came when 8-year-old Sarah Bennett walked over to Clarisa Washington and hugged her legs. "Daddy told me you helped find me," she said in the clear voice of a child who'd been brave far longer than she should have had to be. "Thank you." Clarisa knelt down to Sarah's level, her eyes bright with tears. "You're welcome, baby. You're safe now." At 4:17 p.m., exactly 12 hours after Maya had made the decision to fight back, Judge Harrison called the court to order one final time. In light of new evidence presented by federal investigators, including the confession of Regina Matthews to conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering, and kidnapping, all charges against Clarisa Washington are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The gavel came down, but its sound was drowned out by the roar of 200 people celebrating the vindication of a woman who'd spent her life proving that love was stronger than hate, that community was more powerful than conspiracy, and that sometimes the children you save grow up to save you back. Regina Matthews was led away in federal custody, facing multiple life sentences for crimes that spanned 3 decades. Detective Morrison was arrested for conspiracy and tampering with evidence. The prosecutor who'd pushed for Clarisa's conviction was suspended pending investigation. But the real justice was simpler and more profound. Clarisa Washington walked out of that courtroom a free woman, surrounded by her children and the community that had fought for her freedom. The perfect crime had been destroyed by the perfect love, the kind that sees people's worth even when they can't see it themselves, and fights for them anyway. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the house on Maple Street, illuminating the kitchen where Clarisa Washington stood making breakfast for her family, a ritual that had taken on sacred meaning after months of believing she'd never do it again. At 58, she moved with a lightness that hadn't been there before her ordeal, as if surviving the worst thing imaginable had freed her from the fear of lesser troubles. "Mama, you're humming again," Maya observed, walking into the kitchen in her scrubs. She'd returned to her residency at Detroit Medical Center, where she was now heading a new program for children in foster care. Kids who needed someone to understand that their past didn't define their future. "Am I?" Clarisa smiled, not stopping as she flipped pancakes shaped like hearts, just like she used to when Maya and Darius were small. "I suppose I have a lot to hum about these days." The kitchen was full of evidence of their restored life. Family photos back on the refrigerator, Maya's medical journals stacked on the counter next to Darius's legal briefs. Fresh flowers from the garden Clarisa had replanted after the asset seizure had been reversed. But more than the physical objects, the house was filled with something that had almost been lost. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Darius appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie with one hand while balancing his phone with the other. At 36, he'd become something of a celebrity lawyer after the national coverage of their case, but he'd used his fame for something meaningful. Starting the Clarisa Washington Foundation, providing legal defense for parents falsely accused of crimes against their children. "That was Sarah Bennett's father," he said, ending his call. "The adoption went through yesterday. She's officially his daughter now, and the trauma counseling is going so well that she's started sleeping through the night." Thomas Bennett had been cleared of all charges after federal investigators confirmed his cooperation had been coerced through threats against his daughter. More than that, he'd become an unexpected friend to the Washington family, bonded by shared trauma and the understanding that love sometimes requires impossible choices. "That's wonderful," Clarisa said, her voice warm with genuine happiness. She'd testified as a character witness at Bennett's hearing, and their friendship had grown from that moment of grace in the courtroom. Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved. Maya poured herself coffee, marveling at how normal this felt after months of crisis. "Speaking of resilient children, Mrs. Patterson called yesterday. 3 more families want to meet with you about fostering." Since her vindication, Clarisa had been approached by dozens of families inspired by her story, people who wanted to open their homes to children who needed them. She'd started informal counseling sessions in her living room, teaching others what she'd learned through 30 years of loving the unlovable. That every child deserves someone who believes in them, even when they can't believe in themselves. "I think I'm ready for that," Clarisa said, surprising both her children. She'd been hesitant about taking on new responsibilities so soon after her ordeal, but something had shifted in her over the past few weeks. "Not to foster more children myself. You two wore me out enough, but to help other families learn what I learned." Darius grinned. "What's that, Mama?" "That love isn't something you earn. It's something you give. And the more you give, the more you have." The doorbell rang, and Maya went to answer it, returning with a young woman who looked nervously excited. Jennifer Hayes, the lawyer who'd been suspended for trying to defend Clarisa, had been fully vindicated and reinstated to the bar. More than that, she'd been hired by Darius's firm as a partner, specializing in cases where the system had failed its most vulnerable members. "Mrs. Washington," Jennifer said, holding a manila folder, "I have the final paperwork from the federal case." She spread the documents across the kitchen table. Regina Matthews had been sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Detective Morrison got 25 years for conspiracy and evidence tampering. The prosecutor who'd pursued Clarisa's case had been disbarred and faced his own criminal charges. Judge Harrison had been removed from the bench and was under federal investigation. But the document that mattered most to Clarisa was simpler: a formal apology from the state of Michigan, acknowledging the injustice she'd suffered and establishing a victim compensation fund in her name. "It's over," Jennifer said simply. "Really, truly over." Clarisa looked at the papers that formally closed the chapter on the worst period of her life, then set them aside to focus on what mattered more. Her family, gathering around her kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Proof that love had won. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Maya said, reaching for her mother's hand. "That first night, when you found us in the alley. You were so scared, we all were, but you chose love anyway." "I didn't feel like I was choosing anything," Clarisa replied. "I just looked at you two and knew I couldn't walk away." "That's the point, Mama," Darius added, covering their joined hands with his own. "You didn't choose to love us because we deserved it or because it was easy. You chose it because that's who you are. That's who you've always been." Clarisa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. The kind that come from finally understanding something you'd been too close to see. For 30 years, she'd carried the voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve the happiness she'd found. But that voice had been wrong. She wasn't worthy of love because she was perfect. She was worthy of love because she was human, because she'd chosen to give love even when it was hard, because she'd built a life on the radical belief that every person, including herself, deserved to be cherished. "I have something to tell you both," she said, looking at the 2 extraordinary adults who'd grown from the scared children she'd found in an alley. "I've been offered a job." Maya and Darius exchanged glances. Since her vindication, Clarisa had been contacted by schools across the country wanting to hire the teacher who'd become a symbol of integrity and resilience. "The Detroit Public Schools Foundation wants me to head a new program for at-risk children. Kids in foster care, kids who've been abandoned or neglected. They want me to create a curriculum that teaches them not just academics, but that they have worth." "Mama, that's amazing," Maya said. "Will you take it?" Clarisa smiled, feeling more certain than she'd felt about anything in months. "I think I will. I spent 30 years learning how to love 2 beautiful children. Maybe it's time to share what I learned with a few hundred more." The morning continued with the comfortable chaos of family life. Darius rushing off to court, Maya heading to the hospital, and Clarisa preparing for her day of substitute teaching while she considered the foundation's offer. But before they scattered to their separate worlds, they shared a moment that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. They stood in the hallway by the front door, the same spot where Clarisa had been arrested on that terrible morning, and they laughed. Really laughed, the kind of deep, cleansing laughter that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you but didn't. "I love you, Mama," Maya said, hugging her mother tight. "I love you too, baby girl." "I love you both," Darius added, wrapping his arms around his mother and sister. "My beautiful, stubborn, impossible family." As her children left for their days, Maya to save lives, Darius to seek justice, Clarisa stood in her doorway watching them go. 2 abandoned children had grown into adults who were changing the world, 1 patient and 1 client at a time. The scared little girl who'd once believed she wasn't worthy of love had become a woman who'd touched hundreds of lives with her capacity to see the best in people. Regina Matthews was in federal prison, but Clarisa found she felt more pity than anger for her former friend. Regina had spent 30 years consumed by envy and bitterness, missing out on the joy that comes from building others up instead of tearing them down. In trying to destroy Clarisa's life, she'd only proven how powerful that life had been. Powerful enough to inspire hundreds of people to fight for justice. Powerful enough to create a love so strong that it could survive any conspiracy. That afternoon, Clarisa visited the cemetery where her own mother was buried. She hadn't been to Denise's grave since the funeral 15 years earlier, but her ordeal had taught her something about forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving herself for the childhood she'd survived and the mother who hadn't been strong enough to love her. "I understand now, Mama," she said, kneeling beside the simple headstone. "You were hurt too. You did the best you could with what you had. And look what grew from the seeds you planted, even though you couldn't stay to tend the garden." She left flowers, daisies, Denise's favorite, and walked away feeling lighter than she had in years. That evening, the Washington family gathered for dinner at the house on Maple Street. Not just Clarisa, Maya, and Darius, but the extended family they'd built over 30 years. Dr. Chun from the hospital, Marcus Johnson from the FBI, Isaiah Torres the journalist who'd broken the story, Jennifer Hayes, even Thomas Bennett and his daughter Sarah. As they sat around the table sharing food and stories and laughter, Clarisa looked at each face and marveled at the tapestry of love they'd woven together. This was her true victory. Not the legal vindication or the public apology, but the proof that love multiplies when it's shared freely and without condition. "I have an announcement," she said as dinner wound down. "I've decided to write a book about our story. Not for fame or money, but because I think there are other people out there who need to know that their past doesn't determine their future. That love is always possible, even when it seems impossible." "What will you call it?" Sarah Bennett asked, her 8-year-old voice bright with curiosity. Clarisa smiled, looking around the table at all the people who'd proven that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. "The children who saved me back," she said simply. 6 months after her darkest hour, Clarisa Washington understood something that had taken 58 years to learn. She had always been worthy of love. Not because she was perfect, but because she was perfectly herself, a woman who'd chosen to believe in love even when love seemed impossible, who'd given her heart freely to children who needed her, and who'd built a legacy that would outlast any conspiracy. The little girl who'd been abandoned at 7 had become the woman who'd saved dozens. The young adult who'd believed she wasn't good enough had become the mother whose love was so powerful it inspired a community to fight for justice. As the evening ended and their chosen family said their goodbyes, Clarisa stood in her kitchen washing dishes and humming an old gospel song her own mother used to sing. Through the window, she could see Darius and Maya walking Sarah Bennett to her father's car, 3 generations connected by love and loss and the beautiful messiness of human connection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love over fear, new chances to prove that broken things can be mended, and that the best families are often the ones we create rather than the ones we're born into. But tonight, Clarisa Washington was exactly where she belonged. Home, surrounded by love, humming in her kitchen while her children, all of them, scattered to their own lives, carrying pieces of her heart into a world that was better because she'd chosen to believe in love even when it seemed impossible. And they all lived happily, messily, beautifully ever after. Hey, wonderful viewers, what an incredible journey this has been. From that freezing alley in Detroit to a packed courtroom where justice finally prevailed, Clarisa's story reminds us that love isn't just an emotion. It's an action, a choice we make every single day. The woman who thought she wasn't worthy of love discovered that she'd been planting seeds of worth in everyone around her for 30 years. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the incredible power of human resilience and love. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what part of Clarisa's journey resonated most with you. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love, not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly you. Keep believing, keep loving, and keep fighting for what matters most. See you in the next story.